Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And our topic of discussion today is education. On the conversation on education, I want to talk about conformity. More specifically, I want to talk about anti-conformity, because I personally identify as an anti-conformist, but that doesn't translate the way that you typically would. It's not like an extremist position. It's just a position that aligns with my belief in individuality being however it translates for whomever is seeking to find the alignment with themselves. And I find that it is conformity. It is this desire to conform, or the expectation to conform to a lot of rules that are abstract, but that we take as fact. They're the kind of rules that make us feel like there's something wrong with us because there's something about us that doesn't align. And so I want to talk a little bit about my views on anti-conformity and how that translates in allowing me to live as an individual, loud and proud, without feeling inclined to hide parts of myself. And so I had a problem, from a very young age, had a problem with conformity, because I think what conformity does is it really does give us permission to stop thinking critically about some of the narratives and some of the norms that are fluctuating around us all the time. And these norms are changing, like they change subtly, but there's some aspects of them that not only are constant, or they're like this constant undercurrent, but they keep us feeling insecure about the way that we show up. They keep us feeling as though there are parts of how we show up that we really need to polish before we would be deemed or seen acceptable. And I think that because we do our best to try to polish these parts of ourselves, we find ourselves seeking to acceptance in environments where we maybe don't naturally fit, rather than figuring out who we are and then allowing that process to align us to environments that suit us best. And so I find right now personally that I'm in an environment that suits me best, because it allows me to be who I am inside and outside of those specific contexts, right? And so I'm someone who considers myself to be an advocate for individuality. I am an advocate for anti-conformity. I do believe that that translates as giving people the opportunity to think critically, to ask questions, to cultivate themselves intellectually. I consider myself to be a corporate hipster. Like, I'm a hippie at heart. I love gardening. I love being in nature, but I also love the challenge of my job. I like working in a corporate environment. I like a traditional 9 to 5. I don't think that the two are contradictions to one another, but a lot of the times when you see people and their interests and how that translates by way of their career, by way of their lifestyle, by way of how they live their lives, you don't see those two coming together. And I think that's really important as a woman in business, as a woman who also believes in social entrepreneurship, who's trying to build her own personal product that enables people to think critically, that I'm very vocal about the fact that I am who I am in the position that I'm in, because I have been actively anti-conformist to the boxes that people have tried to put me in. Like, I have been very intentional and very mindful about aligning myself to spaces and to places where who I am and how I'm showing up isn't so disruptive that it keeps them from seeing me in those specific spaces, right? And so I'm a project manager. I have my background. I have an MBA. I was doing project management long before I got my MBA. I also have my Lean Six Sigma green belt, and I am also someone who has been doing yoga for the last 19 years of my life, almost 20 years. I've gone through different styles of yoga. I believe in alignment. I believe in taking care of our bodies. I believe in having conversations that challenge our ways of thinking, and I don't understand why sometimes people think that these things clash, that having these personal interests would clash with my career path. I think that they go together because they go with me, they go with who I am. And I think that a lot of people try to fit into small little boxes because that's what the world expects of them. But I think that it's much more of a statement, it's much more brave and courageous, and also enabling you to figure out what meaning, what fulfillment, what happiness looks like when you give yourself the opportunity to explore your individuality in all of the ways that it translates, and challenge the idea that who you are and how that translates presents a contradiction. I think a lot of us are examples of some of the stereotypes that are false. I think who we are as individuals is its own example of a stereotype being false. But a lot of people walk away from conversations with you and with I holding on to those stereotypes because we don't challenge the fact that they recognize that it's an exception to the rule, but maybe that means that the rule itself is a problem, right? And so I am so anti-conformist that when I do engage with people in conversation around interests, around profession, around career, around just goals and the pursuit of happiness, I do try to bring out in people in conversation the elements of themselves that they think that they need to hide because of the context that they're in. And I think that it's just so important that each of us feel comfortable in the environments that we choose to be in, to be our whole selves in those environments, right? And so that's sort of the take that I have on anti-conformity. It's not like an anarchist position. I do realize that we need to have a structured society with a set of governing rules that allows us to be collaborative, that allows us to be cordial with one another, but I don't think that those rules should be so restrictive that it keeps us from being who we are, and it keeps us playing small. And I think a lot of these rules around individuality, around personality, around, norms and expectations, they need to be rules that enable us, that propel us, that allow us to really express ourselves, to be our full selves, and not the opposite. And I think that if you do find that when you are being your full self, that it presents friction and issues, that's a signal that maybe you're not in the right environment. It's not a signal that there's something wrong with you. And I think a lot of people do find that when there is a clash, when there's friction, that it's a signal that there's something wrong with them rather than a signal that there's something wrong with their environment. I don't know why there's this propensity to think that there's something wrong with us. We'll go internal when it comes to something negative rather than thinking about, well, maybe it's the setting that I'm in that doesn't quite align. And so because I am unapologetically myself, I recognize like there's a growth journey here. There are things about myself that I have to work on, that I have to adjust, that I have to, work on evolving, but fundamentally like who I am by way of how that translates in my interests and my desires, how that translates by way of the things that I decide to spend my time on. Like those are fundamental elements of myself that I have grown into over the last few years, right? I have done a lot of self-discovery and self-exploration to find these areas in my life that help the power and the convictions that I have. I have lived my life fully, intentionally, and mindfully to be able to come on here and speak with conviction about the things that I believe in. I do believe that individuality can present a walking contradiction. You can be so many different contradicting beliefs based on how people were brought up to believe the things about people like you. And because I never really felt the weight of conforming, I think people always just recognized that I was the exception to whatever rule they thought applied to me, because I grew up in the country in a fairly small community where people knew me personally. I didn't carry the weight of collective identity, and because I didn't carry that weight of collective identity as a young child, I picked and choose to what extent I would step into collective identities and collective realities as an adult. And because of that, I am firmly an individualist before I would ever allow myself to speak on or speak to like identifiers that are more collective, free of distance between how I feel and how I present and how I feel about myself and about the people around me. I don't feel the same things that people would anticipate if I were someone who lived and breathed within a collective identity. And so I would love for us all to break away from the idea that we're part of this collective, and that means that we all have to think alike and behave alike and do alike. I would much rather that we think about, well, how can I show up as myself, all of the ways that translates, and then find people who are similar, and that all of the things that translate as them being them, their hobbies, their interests, where they spend their time, what they do for work, all of those things, that they're proud to be all of those things and all the different colors that comes in without apology. And I think a lot of us need to be more unapologetic about who we are, how that translates, and how that can disrupt people sometimes. And so in that sense, I am an anti-conformist. In that sense, I do believe that individuality plays a significant higher degree of importance than any collective identity ever will. And to that extent is why I built Project Purpose, to give people an opportunity to really do that self-discovery, to do that self-exploration, to cultivate inner mastery for themselves. Because I think that we find a lot more pleasure even in life when we're looking at life from a place of alignment, from a place of attunement, from a place of recognizing like who we are, how we are, is always growing and evolving, but in alignment with the trajectory that we want ourselves to go in, not in alignment with anyone else's expectations but our own. But if we've never given ourselves permission to only live in alignment to our own expectations, then it's very hard to not feel resentful to the people who do, because we've never given ourselves permission to do that. And I've met a lot of people who fit into a box very neatly because they've cut themselves off from the parts of themselves that would stick out of that box, but they're resentful about it, they're bitter about it, because who you are, how you are, that's not going to change. So it's better to like embrace who you are, embrace your identity, and then align yourself to the people who are doing the same. And it doesn't mean that you're aligning yourself to people who are like you, but you're aligning yourself to people who are like-minded. Know the difference. And anyway, that was the conversation I want to have with you today. Some food for thought for you around conformity, around the things that you're conforming to right now that really don't feel like it fits with who you are as an individual, doesn't fit with your identity, and think about, well, how can you break away from that habit? Because there's a habit of conformity that a lot of us have been conditioned to align ourselves to, even if it breaks us away from ourselves. So let's focus on individuality, on embracing our individuality, on embracing our identity, and see where that journey takes us. In any case, that was a topic of conversation for today, some food for thought for you. If I have piqued your interest, then I do invite you to tune in. We do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website, so definitely be sure to check that out. Now, these events are paid events, so if you do see yourself participating in our community community on an ongoing basis, and I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. Yes, so we do offer package plans over and above our live events, as well as access to webinars and workshops largely focused on self-mastery over and above these events. So check that out, be part of our game changer community, being part of the change that you want to see, allowing us a small role to play in your journey. We are on the road to 1K, so we do invite you to follow us, share if you're still here, like leave a like, and also recognize that for us, leadership starts at a young age. It doesn't start when we're adults. And if you do find that leadership development is an area that you would like to center some of your children focus on, then we do offer leadership development based on 4 core principles of self-concept, of autonomy, of compassion, and of self-efficacy. Recognize that if you cultivate those pillars of identity, then there's nothing that can stop us in this world. So that's the topic of conversation for today. Some of the things that you can check out our website, and we'll look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.